stop. Before you click away, ask yourself this. Do you really know the people behind those glamorous smiles, those perfect faces frozen in black and white, immortalized as legends, worshipped as gods? Because I'm about to pull back a curtain that Hollywood has kept drawn for nearly a century. You believed those smiles, didn't you? You saw the glittering premieres, the acceptance speeches dripping with gratitude, the gracious interviews where stars spoke of their wonderful colleagues and their blessed careers. You bought every word of it. Forget it all. Every single word was a performance. The greatest performance of their lives, in fact, because the truth happening just off camera would have destroyed them. What I'm going to reveal isn't just gossip. This is documented cruelty, systematic abuse, patterns of behavior so toxic that entire film crews would pray they'd never have to work with these people again. We're descending into the basement of the Dream Factory, where the machinery of stardom was greased with tears, blood, and shattered careers. By the time we reach the final name on this list, you'll understand why one funeral in Hollywood drew thousands of mourners who came simply to make sure the deceased was really dead. You'll learn about the director who drove his crews to collapse in the desert heat, the executive who made actresses choose between their dignity and their dreams, the star whose fists spoke louder than his legendary voice. But before we get to the first name, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Trust me, you're going to want to share what you're about to discover. She had eyes that could cut through steel. The American Film Institute called her the second greatest female film legend of all time. 2 Oscars, 10 nominations, a career that spanned over 100 films. Bette Davis was untouchable, brilliant, a force of nature who refused to bow to the studio bosses. She fought for better roles, better pay, equality in an industry designed to chew up women and spit them out. She was a pioneer, a rebel, an icon. But here's what they don't tell you in the highlight reels. The woman who played strong, independent characters on screen was, behind the scenes, a calculated destroyer of anyone who stood in her way. This wasn't about artistic integrity. This was about dominance, pure and simple. Let's talk about Joan Crawford. Their feud wasn't some catty rivalry drummed up for publicity. This was warfare. When Davis and Crawford co-starred in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane in 1962, the production became a battlefield. Davis would say good morning to Crawford every single day. Crawford ignored her. Completely. Every single day. Then, Davis kicked Crawford in the head during a fight scene, requiring stitches. Davis claimed she barely touched her. When it came time to film a scene where Davis had to drag Crawford across the floor, Crawford strapped on a weightlifter's belt underneath her costume, making herself as heavy as possible. She knew Davis had chronic back problems. This wasn't a fight. It was an execution. The stories pile up like bodies. Davis walked off sets when she disagreed with directors. She held up entire productions with her demands. In 1958, producer William Fry hired her for a TV special called Split Second. On the morning of the first day of shooting, 5 a.m., Davis called him. She was sick, she said. She couldn't work. When Fry arrived at her house, he discovered she'd had a physical altercation with her husband the night before and had scraped up one side of her face, falling in their gravel driveway. Fry convinced her to shoot anyway, promising to work around her injuries. But Davis still found ways to sabotage the production, insisting on filming a crucial scene with her back to the camera, making reshoots necessary. When Fry confronted her, she screamed at him with venom that could strip paint. And here's the real darkness. The studios enabled all of it. Warner Brothers, her home for most of her career, let her terrorize crews because she made them money. Mountains of it. They'd slap her wrist, smooth things over, and send her right back out to destroy another director's sanity. The machine protected her because she was profitable, and profitability in Hollywood forgave any sin. Davis herself admitted she never wanted to be liked. She wanted to be respected, feared, obeyed. And she got exactly what she wanted by turning every film set into her personal kingdom, where anyone who challenged her authority faced her wrath. They called it dedication to her craft. But if you were on the receiving end, it felt a lot more like cruelty. She clawed her way up from poverty, From dancing in seedy clubs to becoming one of MGM's biggest stars, Joan Crawford built herself into a legend through sheer force of will. The cameras loved her. Audiences worshipped her. She represented Hollywood glamour in its purest, most intoxicating form. Then came 1978. Her daughter Christina published Mommy Dearest, and the world learned what happened when the cameras stopped rolling. The book described a mother who beat her children, who flew into rages over wire hangers, who created an atmosphere of terror in her Beverly Hills mansion that tourists gawked at from the street. Christina described being locked in storage rooms, being strangled, showing up to meetings with black eyes and swollen lips. Now, Crawford's defenders will tell you the book is fiction. Her twin daughters said they never witnessed any abuse. Her friends claimed Christina was a spoiled brat seeking revenge. But here's what's documented, what nobody disputes. Joan Crawford was obsessed with control to a pathological degree. On movie sets, she was known for her extreme perfectionism that bled into cruelty. Staff members who didn't meet her cleaning standards were fired on the spot. Her marriages dissolved under the weight of her need to dominate every aspect of her environment. Her treatment of employees followed a pattern. She demanded absolute loyalty, absolute precision, absolute submission. Those who gave it received her favor. Those who failed to meet her impossible standards found themselves destroyed, their careers ruined by her influence. This was a woman who understood power and wielded it like a scalpel, cutting away anyone who disappointed her. The studio system gave her this power. MGM built her image, protected her secrets, enabled her worst impulses because she was box office gold. When she moved to Columbia, Harry Cohn tried to force himself on her. She shut him down with a single line about having lunch with his wife and children the next day. That's how powerful she was. She could face down one of Hollywood's most notorious predators because she had become just as ruthless, just as calculating, just as willing to destroy to get what she wanted. Crawford lived in a world of her own creation, where reality bent to her will, and anyone who challenged that reality faced consequences. Some called it strength. Others called it something far darker. But the machine kept churning, kept producing her films, kept feeding her the control she craved, because in Hollywood, if you make them money, they'll forgive you anything. He arrived in America with nothing and crowned himself with nobility. Erich Oswald Stroheim became Erich Oswald Hans Karl Maria von Stroheim, fabricating an aristocratic past complete with military honors he never earned. The lies became his foundation, but his talent was devastatingly real. When he directed his first film, Blind Husbands, in 1919, Hollywood discovered something terrifying: a perfectionist with no concept of limits. Von Stroheim didn't just direct films, he tortured them into existence. During the production of Greed, he shot in San Francisco with his actors in period costume and heavy makeup, while modern cars drove past in the background. Then, he took his crew to Death Valley in the middle of summer. Not early summer. Peak summer, when the temperature climbed past 120 degrees. His actors collapsed from heat exhaustion. His crew begged him to stop. He kept shooting. The original cut ran 10 hours. 10 hours! When the studio demanded he cut it down, he reduced it to 6 hours, still intending to show it over 2 nights. The studio eventually hacked it down to 140 minutes, melting the rest down for its silver content. But here's what made von Stroheim truly dangerous. He believed his vision justified any amount of human suffering. On the set of Foolish Wives, he insisted that Austrian guards wear authentic, expensive regulation underwear that would never be visible on camera. The budget ballooned past $1 million, unheard of at the time. Studios fired him repeatedly. He'd get hired again, start another production, and immediately begin driving costs through the roof while brutalizing his cast and crew. His own actors hated him. During one fight scene, he screamed at them to hate each other like they hated him. That wasn't direction, that was confession. Gloria Swanson, one of the biggest stars in Hollywood, fired him from Queen Kelly when the production costs doubled with no end in sight. Irving Thalberg, one of Hollywood's boy wonder producers, fired him from Merry-Go-Round mid-production. The pattern repeated over and over. brilliant work achieved through methods that destroyed everyone around him. The studios kept hiring him because occasionally, despite the chaos, he produced masterpieces. They enabled his tyranny, allowed him to treat human beings like props because art, they told themselves, required sacrifice. But it wasn't the artists sacrificing. It was the crews working 20-hour days, the actors pushed beyond exhaustion, the technicians who collapsed trying to realize his impossible demands. Von Stroheim sacrificed other people's health, sanity, and careers on the altar of his ego, and Hollywood called it genius. He was born into American theater royalty. The Barrymore name meant excellence, tradition, artistry at its highest level. When John Barrymore played Hamlet in 1922, critics called it the performance of the century. His profile was so perfect they called him the Great Profile. Women fainted at his performances. His talent seemed limitless, his future guaranteed. Alcohol destroyed all of it, but not quietly, not privately. John Barrymore's descent into alcoholism played out on film sets across Hollywood for 2 decades, a public disintegration that the studios exploited until there was nothing left to exploit. By the mid-1930s, Barrymore couldn't remember his lines. Studios had to write them on blackboards positioned just off camera. During Romeo and Juliet in 1936, MGM placed him in a sanatorium to dry him out before filming. He drank anyway, sneaking liquor however he could. Co-star Basil Rathbone recalled that Barrymore was unreliable and intoxicated on set, that it was profoundly sad to watch. Directors learned to expect his drunkenness, to plan around it, to shoot scenes multiple times hoping to catch a moment when he was coherent enough to deliver a line correctly. But here's what makes Barrymore's story truly disturbing. The studios used him. They kept hiring him, kept putting him in front of cameras, kept marketing his films even as he fell apart before their eyes. They made money off his decay. When he could no longer play dramatic roles, they cast him as drunk characters, turning his disease into entertainment. He played an alcoholic Shakespearean ham in his final film, Playmates, a grotesque parody of what he had once been. The directors resented him. The producers resented him. His fellow actors watched the legend crumble and resented having to carry scenes while he struggled to stand upright. In 1942, while recording a radio program, he collapsed. 10 days later, he was dead at 60. Cirrhosis, kidney failure, pneumonia. His body gave out after years of punishment that everyone in Hollywood had watched, enabled, and profited from. The studios could have helped him. They could have insisted on treatment, on rehabilitation, on anything other than squeezing every last drop of usable footage from a dying man. But that's not how the machine worked. The machine consumed. Barrymore was consumed. And when there was nothing left, they found someone else to feed into the gears. On screen, he played lovable rogues and gentle giants. Audiences adored his performances in The Champ and Grand Hotel. He won an Oscar. He made MGM millions of dollars. Children especially seemed to love him, and the studio built his image around that warm, paternal quality. Off-screen, Wallace Beery was one of the most hated men in Hollywood. Let's start with the documented facts. During the filming of Slave Ship in 1937, Beery had a scene where he was supposed to slap his 16-year-old co-star, Mickey Rooney. It was meant to be staged, theatrical, fake. Beery struck Rooney full force across the face without warning, knocking the teenager to the ground and ruining the take. The crew erupted in outrage. Director Tay Garnett pulled Beery aside and told him very clearly that everyone on set loved Rooney, and it would be unfortunate if heavy lighting equipment accidentally fell on Beery's head. Beery behaved himself for the rest of the production, not because he felt remorse, because he'd been threatened with violence. The stories accumulate. When Beery worked with 12-year-old Darryl Hickman on Jackass Mail, he invited the child to lunch. When the bill came, Beery looked at the confused child and told him he owed 75 cents. Beery, one of the highest-paid actors in Hollywood, made a 12-year-old pay for his own meal. He refused to tip studio staff, explaining that since he was a star, he received excellent service all the time, so tips would be wasteful. He stole expensive items from film sets. The studio's head of publicity complained directly to Louis B. Mayer, who shook his head and did nothing. Beery made too much money. Even Mayer, who controlled every aspect of MGM like a totalitarian dictator, couldn't handle Beery. When Mayer ordered reshoots for Treasure Island, Beery threw a tantrum that stretched a one-day job into 4 days. He deliberately flubbed lines. He hid in his dressing room for hours. He took extended breaks whenever he felt like it. And there was nothing Mayer could do because Beery's films were profitable, and profitability forgave everything. His marriage to Gloria Swanson lasted 21 days. She later said he'd been invited to every fashionable home in Beverly Hills exactly once. His treatment of young performers became so notorious that when Dickie Moore interviewed former child stars for his book on child actors, Wallace Beery's name came up repeatedly as someone who had made their lives miserable. The machine protected him. MGM knew what he was. They knew he bullied children, abused his power, treated people like garbage. They knew and they didn't care. He filled seats. He won awards. And in Hollywood, if you deliver box office numbers, you can do almost anything to anyone, and the machine will shield you, enable you, keep feeding you victims until the money stops flowing. His office was designed like Mussolini's. The desk sat elevated, placing Harry Cohn above everyone who entered. Behind him, a wall displayed every Oscar Columbia Pictures had won, 52 of them eventually. Visitors would be buzzed in when Cohn decided they'd waited long enough, often deliberately kept in the lobby for hours to establish dominance. Once inside, they faced a man who ruled through intimidation, humiliation, and sexual coercion. Harry Cohn built Columbia Pictures from nothing into a major studio, and he did it, in his own words, with spit and wire and his fists. He stole, he cheated, he beat people's brains out, and he was proud of it. Writer Ben Hecht called him White Fang. Others called him the meanest man in Hollywood. Cohn wore both nicknames as badges of honor. The sexual abuse was systematic. Cohn kept a room adjacent to his office where he summoned starlets for afternoon encounters. Refusal meant being fired and blacklisted. Rita Hayworth fought him off for years, and he retaliated by fining her for insubordination, bugging her dressing rooms, stalking her, meddling in her private life. When she refused him, he made her suffer in every other way he could devise. Joan Crawford shut him down by mentioning she was having lunch with his wife and children. Kim Novak refused him in the 1950s and fell in love with Sammy Davis Jr. Cohn. Enraged that his white star was dating a black man, allegedly ordered a mob hit on Davis unless he immediately married a black woman. Davis married a woman he barely knew within hours. Director Charles Vidor sued Cohn personally for abusive behavior, not for breach of contract, for abuse. In open court, Vidor described how Cohn undermined his authority, told stories about him behind his back, created an atmosphere of harassment that made directing impossible. Actress Jean Arthur ran through the Columbia lot screaming that she was free when her contract finally expired, celebrating her escape from Cohn's control. But here's the most disturbing part. Everyone knew. The entire industry knew what Cohn was doing. They knew about the coercion, the threats, the systematic abuse of women who had no power to refuse him. And they did nothing. Why? Because Columbia Pictures was profitable. Because Cohn discovered talent, made hit films, understood what audiences wanted. Because in Hollywood, profit forgave every sin. When Cohn died in 1958, his funeral drew 2,000 mourners. Red Skelton joked that it proved what Harry always said, give the public what they want and they'll come out for it. The joke's real meaning was darker. They came to make sure he was really dead. He presented himself as a benevolent patriarch, the father of MGM's family of stars. Louis B. Mayer would cry in meetings, expressing his deep concern for his actors' well-being. He'd hug them, tell them to come to him with any problem, promise that he only wanted what was best for them. Young stars like Mickey Rooney saw him as a father figure, someone who guided and protected them. But that image was a carefully constructed lie. Behind the paternal facade, Mayer controlled every aspect of his stars' lives with invasive precision. He arranged marriages, broke up relationships he disapproved of, dictated who could date whom. When Van Johnson fell in love with someone Mayer deemed inappropriate, Mayer intervened, manipulating the situation until Johnson married who Mayer wanted him to marry. When Robert Taylor asked for a raise, Mayer hugged him, cried a little, and sent him away without the raise. convinced that loyalty to the studio was more important than fair compensation. Taylor remained one of the most underpaid stars on the lot for his entire 25-year career at MGM. The control extended into darker territory. Meyer's treatment of Judy Garland stands as one of Hollywood's most grotesque examples of institutional abuse. The studio, under Meyer's direction, controlled her weight obsessively. They gave her chicken soup and black coffee when she wanted real food. During singing lessons, Meyer would have the teenage Garland sit on his lap while he placed his hands on her chest, allegedly to help with breathing techniques. When young stars at MGM ran out of energy from grueling production schedules, the studio provided them with stimulants to keep them working. Garland later confirmed this systematic drugging of children to maximize productivity. Meyer had an open-door policy for anyone with problems, but it was a trap. Directors described how he would prod, question, and suck them dry of information. Every confidence shared became ammunition he could use for control. He knew everyone's secrets, everyone's weaknesses, everyone's fears, and he used that knowledge ruthlessly. The machine he built operated like a totalitarian state. MGM managed actors' hairstyles, their marriages, their public appearances, their private lives. Employees described feeling grateful for his attention while simultaneously terrified of disappointing him. He was father and tyrant, protector and predator, benevolent and monstrous, often in the same conversation. In 1951, when profits declined, MGM forced Meyer out. He walked down a red carpet lined with applauding actors, a final performance for the man who had made performance the currency of survival. Actor Turin Bey said it marked the end of Hollywood in every meaningful way. But Meyer's legacy persisted. The system he perfected, the invasive control, the exploitation disguised as paternal care, became the blueprint for how studios treated their talent for decades. They called him the King of Hollywood. His performance as Rhett Butler in Gone with the Wind made him immortal. That smirk, that mustache, that effortless charisma, he defined what a leading man should be. Women around the world fantasized about him. Men wanted to be him. His image was untouchable, perfect, heroic. The reality was uglier, much uglier. Gable altered scripts when he felt scenes conflicted with his image. He refused to film sequences that might make him look weak or vulnerable. His co-stars learned to work around his ego, his demands, his conviction that the camera existed to worship him. Crew members noted his dismissive behavior, the way he treated them as if they were invisible, relevant only when they served his needs. But the darkness goes deeper. In 1935, Gable worked with Loretta Young on Call of the Wild. They were filming on location, traveling back to Hollywood on an overnight train. Young was recently separated from her husband. By all accounts, she wasn't interested in Gable's advances. On that train, Gable entered her sleeping compartment. What happened next remained hidden for decades. Young never publicly accused Gable of anything specific. She never used the word rape. But years later, she asked her daughter-in-law to explain the term date rape. When her daughter-in-law finished explaining, Young said quietly, "That's what happened between me and Clark." Young became pregnant. She hid the pregnancy from the media through an elaborate ruse involving a fake adoption. The baby, Judy, grew up looking more and more like Gable, the resemblance impossible to ignore. Young eventually admitted the truth, but by then Gable was long dead, his reputation secure, his image untarnished. The studios knew. MGM's fixers knew. They helped Young hide the pregnancy, helped construct the adoption story, protected Gable from any consequences. Why? Because he was the king. Because his films made astronomical amounts of money. Because in Hollywood, if you're profitable enough, the machine doesn't just protect you, it becomes complicit in your crimes. Gable married 5 times and cheated on every wife. He slept with his co-stars habitually. His off-screen behavior contradicted every heroic role he played, but audiences never knew. The publicity machine crafted an image of masculine virtue, while Gable lived a life of casual cruelty and exploitation. When he died in 1960, the world mourned the king of Hollywood, never knowing the darkness he had left in his wake. Tallulah Bankhead was magnetic. When she entered a room, Everyone noticed. Her voice, her presence, her wit, she dominated any space she occupied. On stage, she was electric. Her performances crackled with an energy that critics struggled to describe. She was brilliant, and she knew it. Everyone knew it. But brilliance and toxicity often share the same container. Bankhead's substance abuse was legendary. Cocaine, alcohol, whatever she could get her hands on, she consumed it all with the same voracious appetite she brought to everything else. Her behavior on film sets became increasingly erratic and aggressive. She would show up intoxicated, deliver performances that ranged from transcendent to incomprehensible, and leave everyone around her emotionally exhausted. Directors learned to fear working with her because they never knew which Tallulah would arrive. Some days she'd be professional, focused, delivering work that justified her reputation. Other days she'd be volatile, picking fights, making impossible demands, creating chaos that brought productions to a halt. Her co-stars described the experience of working with her as draining, like being caught in a storm that you knew would eventually pass but that might destroy you before it did. The tragedy of Bankhead is that her talent was genuine. She wasn't a fraud coasting on image. When she was good, she was phenomenal. But the substances and the volatility made her increasingly unemployable. Studios tolerated her behavior for as long as her box office value outweighed the production nightmares. But eventually, the calculation shifted. Roles dried up. Opportunities vanished. The woman who had once been one of theater's brightest lights found herself working less and less, her reputation preceding her like a warning signal. Hollywood's machine failed her in a different way than it failed others. Instead of enabling her worst impulses to extract profit, the industry eventually just abandoned her, letting her spiral without intervention because she no longer generated enough revenue to justify the chaos. In the end, Bankhead became a cautionary tale, a reminder that talent alone couldn't save you if you destroyed everyone around you in the process of expressing it. Orson Welles arrived in Hollywood at 25 years old with a contract that gave him unprecedented creative control. He made Citizen Kane, a film that revolutionized cinema and that many critics still consider the greatest movie ever made. His talent was undeniable, towering, transformative. He knew exactly how gifted he was, and he made sure everyone else knew it too. That ego destroyed him. Welles refused to compromise on anything. Every film became a battle with studios over budget, runtime, creative control, final cut. He demanded absolute authority, absolute deference to his vision, absolute freedom to create without interference. When studios pushed back, he dug in harder. When collaborators offered suggestions, he dismissed them as Philistines who couldn't understand what he was trying to achieve. Directors and producers grew to despise working with him. His brilliance came packaged with an arrogance that made collaboration impossible. He rewrote scripts on the fly without consulting writers. He demanded expensive reshoots to capture details he'd decided were essential, regardless of budget constraints. He treated anyone who questioned him as an enemy of art itself. The machine eventually crushed him. Studios stopped giving him the freedom he demanded. Financiers stopped trusting him with budgets. His later career became a series of unfinished projects, compromised visions, films that he lost control of in post-production. The boy genius aged into a bitter exile, convinced that Hollywood's small-minded executives had sabotaged his career, unable or unwilling to see how his own intransigence had made him radioactive. But here's the pattern. Welles's ego, his refusal to work within any constraints, his conviction that his genius exempted him from the rules everyone else followed. The studios enabled all of it at first. They gave him Citizen Kane. They gave him the magnificent Ambersons. They let him run wild because they thought his talent would produce profits. When it didn't, when his perfectionism led to box office failures and budget overruns, they cut him off. They didn't try to help him learn collaboration or compromise. They just stopped funding his visions and moved on to the next potential genius they could exploit. Welles died in 1985, still bitter about the system that had first celebrated him and then discarded him. The industry made him believe his talent justified any behavior, any demand, any level of difficulty. Then it punished him for believing exactly what they'd taught him to believe. He was brilliant and insufferable, visionary and impossible, a genius whose greatest enemy was himself. And Hollywood created that monster, then destroyed it when it stopped being profitable. 10 names, 10 patterns. Notice what connects them all. It wasn't just that these people were difficult. It wasn't that they had bad days or tough personalities or artistic temperaments. The system created them, enabled them, profited from them, and ultimately either discarded or protected them based on a single calculation. How much money can we make from this person? Bette Davis terrorized Cruise, and Warner Brothers kept hiring her. Wallace Beery abused children, and MGM shielded him. Harry Cohn sexually coerced actresses, and Columbia Pictures thrived under his leadership. Louis B. Mayer drugged teenage stars, and MGM became the most successful studio in Hollywood. The machine didn't care about cruelty, abuse, or destruction. The machine cared about profit, and anything that generated profit was permitted, encouraged, protected. This isn't just Hollywood history. This is the blueprint. The casting couch, the abuse of power, the exploitation disguised as opportunity, all of it started here, in these gilded studios with these golden age legends. The names and faces have changed, but the system persists because the system works. It worked for decades. It made billions of dollars. And every time someone speaks up about abuse in the entertainment industry, they're fighting against a structure that was built by people like the ones we've discussed today, perfected over generations and designed specifically to protect the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable. These are just 10 examples, 10 names pulled from a vast archive of cruelty and exploitation. How many others remain hidden? How many stories died with the people who lived them, protected by NDAs, silenced by fear, buried by the fixers who made careers out of hiding Hollywood sins? The truth is, we'll never know the full extent of it. We'll never count all the broken careers, the shattered lives, the people ground up and spit out by a machine that valued profit over humanity. You looked behind the curtain. You saw the mechanisms that created the dream factory. The question is, what are you going to do with that knowledge? Will you watch old films differently now, knowing what happened off camera? Will you question the myths, the legends, the carefully constructed images that Hollywood still sells us? The truth has finally found its audience. What you do with it is up to you.